Hey everyone, it's Garrett.
And Moe. So today's topic is pros and cons about living in Japan as a foreigner. Instead of being a foreigner it's a very general word. So I'm gonna ask pros and cons of living here in Japan as a Japanese American.
This is gonna be a long video.
So before we start, please like and subscribe.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a Japanese American. I'm fourth generation. I was born and raised in San Francisco Bay Area. However, I've been living in Tokyo now for about 3 years. Also a disclaimer, I understand that I'm here by choice. I'm not gonna say I hate Japan for any of the cons that come up, because I know that I'm here by choice. And if I'm fortunate enough to be able to say, I can always go back home to America. So, with that out of the way, now we can start. So we're starting with the pro?
Yes!
Pro number one. I think as many folks can imagine, as a Japanese American, it's very easy for me to simply just blend in. I look pretty Japanese, my last name is Japanese. As long as I use my last name for dry cleaned or putting in an order or a name for a reservation, nobody questions anything. This is just another Japanese dude. Because I can blend in, unlike other folks that I meet from the foreign community who have spoken to me about their difficulties of living in Japan, I can't relate at all. If I watched a pros and cons about another foreigner in Japan, it's a completely different experience for me because I don't feel eyes on me all the time. I don't feel the weight of the world the second I step out the door. And even in the States, again, I grew up in San Francisco Bay, so it's pretty diverse, but in other pockets of the States, I would feel that. I can understand what those folks are talking about because I've been in an area where it's predominantly white, predominantly black, predominantly Latino. Oh. Yeah, I know what it's like to be the one person who's not of the same cultural background of the majority. It's so rare in America to find a place where it's like everybody's Japanese. So at first when I came here, it just felt like, wow, this is so comfortable. That's my pro, just being able to camouflage.
Cool.
So the second pro I could say is I've been able to better understand a lot parts of my past, specifically my family upbringing or traditions, mannerisms. Even though I'm fourth generation in America, after living in Japan now for 3 years, it's strange how so many parts of my past begins to make more sense to me after understanding Japanese culture.
So what about other fourth generation? Do they lose all the Japaneseness, you feel like? Or it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be it could be I know fifth generation, I know even third generation. I think it feels like you're losing more and more of your culture to America the longer you stay. I think that's what the crazy part is for me is even though it's been 4 generations deep, I thought that I had lost all my Japanese culture, honestly, until I came here and realized how much was actually preserved this whole entire time.
What drives you to search? In general, you see people who doesn't care at all about their culture.
Yeah.
And you have more drive to understanding your culture.
That's a funny question that you asked that though, because I think for me, it came with when I was doing a lot of work with a lot of Asian American writers in the field, when I was working in New York, and then also even when I came back to the Bay Area and I was doing, managing all these different book events. I'd conduct all these different sort of readings here and there, and I'd have conversations with different authors. And I want to say that a lot of these talks sort of influenced me to get back in touch with my cultural identity and how important that is, because so many younger folks of my generation are falling into that category of just not caring, and they were saying how it's so important for you to have that consciousness towards reclaiming that part, even though you're 4 generations deep, that you don't let America consume you. you know, in that aspect. It inspired me initially to try to refine and write my own book about my own fourth generation Japanese American identity. And that's when it started to turn into, well, okay, I know a lot about the America side. So why is it that I know nothing about the Japan side? Well, it's because I've never really been to Japan. So that's what triggered it. It was never like a strong like I love Japan. Like it was like
natural desire.
it was just sort of me chasing one shiny thing after another shiny thing, and finally it was like, I should go back to Japan if I'm gonna write a more full account about who I am. And then once I came here, then it was like, then I got sucked into Japan. Then Japan consumed me. I'm like getting thrown back and forth between these two different beasts. Like,
should we move on to the third pros?
Yeah. So the third pro is like, simply put, I feel like I'm tall. Like I feel like I'm tall in Japan just because like I'm like a solid 5'8". Like I feel like the average in the States is like about my dad's height, like the 5'11" height. 5'11", 5'10". So then it's like anything shorter than that, and I feel like a little bit of a inferiority complex with my height, just a little bit. And then I came to Japan, and I was like, holy shit. I'm like King Kong. Like, the first time I came here, I felt like, you remember that scene in Elf when he's showering and he realizes he's not an elf? Like, that's how I felt when I was like showering for the first. Well, compared to like an American shower, and especially at the hostel I was staying at, it was like, I was like, oh my god. Like, I was like crouching down trying to get the water on my head. And I could call myself tall.
I would say that you're not tall. So shall we move on to cons? Are you done with talking about how tall you are?
The funny thing about cons is, it's like they're almost the same things as the pros. It's like a double-edged sword.
That you're being short?
Except for that one. But con number one, because I look Japanese, I'm expected to be Japanese, What that kind of looks like is, in a culture like Japan, like, Japanese culture that's so focused on detail, a sense of community, a sense of working together, a sense of being considerate for others, those sort of mannerisms, those sort of political etiquettes, that's when things start to crumble a little bit in my image of blending in perfectly is, the language, or my tattoo, or I like blindsight a lot of folks as soon as they find out I'm a foreigner. At first I used to be like, man, as soon as they find out I'm not Japanese, they treat me so meanly. And I'm like, now that I'm here, I'm like, maybe in some cases I was treated roughly, but probably 99% of the time, it's more just utter confusion. Like, whoa, what just happened? Like, what's wrong? Yeah, like, is this guy okay? And I, as I'm starting to live here longer and longer, exhausting I feel like, but I'm not as butthurt as I used to be when things don't work out.
And let's do the second con.
Okay, so maybe another con is now related to my second pro. Before I said I'm beginning to understand more about my upbringing and my past, is now I'm becoming a lot more lost about who I am in the present. Like a lot of foreigners, the way that they say like, this is how I get used to not being in Japan. I just accept I'm not Japanese. But then to someone like me who's grown up their whole life in America saying I'm Japanese, it's not like something that I can just let go of, It's not that easy as just saying I'm not Japanese. Hooray! It's like
You're still
it's like, yeah, it's still a part of who I am. It's more complicated than that, you know? This isn't a matter of a fashion trend. This is a part of, this is on my documents, you know what I'm saying? Like, and so it wasn't like coming over here, you could just say, okay, yeah, I'm not Japanese. It's like, okay, yeah, I know I'm not born and raised here. What's happening, at least for me, is I'm becoming more and more lost just about who I am, like just culturally.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that.
That's a difficult, isn't it? Difficult topic.
Yeah, and it's not something that you can simply just say, I'm an American in America, I'm a Japanese in Japan.
It's almost a reverse. Huh?
It's reverse.
But it's also an identity, like to show your identity. Like you almost want to say that you're Japanese American to show that you're Japanese side, right? Like you don't want to say American because you have the other side of you.
Yeah, and I guess the difficulty that comes with that is you say you're Japanese American in Japan, and whether you're foreign or you're a Japanese person I'm telling this to, they'll be like, oh, you're half? Oh, so how much? Who's Japanese, your mom or your dad? You know? And nobody can ever wrap their head around that until I like draw them a picture, and then even when I do that, or like explain it, you know, I tell them the whole story. I'll say it in Japanese, I'll say it in English, and still it's like, so why can't you speak Japanese well? Or like, so why, what happened?
Yeah, my mom also said that, like,
like
it's difficult concept.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the con number 3?
Sure. I wish it was as simple as saying like, yeah, and on the other hand, I said I was tall, but then I feel short. But no, it's not. I'd say my third con is probably, it's hard to just simply like hang out with other foreigners. And what I mean by that is especially when I first came here. Nowadays I don't really care, I wouldn't care as much, but like when I first came and my Japanese was like really, really bad, the Japanese worker will always divert all their attention to the person who looks Japanese, even though like the other foreigners will like a lot more well versed in Japanese, are able to explain things on their own. And that used to put me in so many uncomfortable situations, especially when I couldn't speak Japanese. It was like, you know, I look over at my friend, and then my friend will keep trying to like butt in and say what you know, defend us both, and then the worker will keep trying to go back to me, and it's like no. Look at him. They look at him like why am I talking to him? I want to talk to you. It's like no, that's not so much of the part today that bothers me, but in the beginning that was definitely uncomfortable. But then I'm like still kind of the minority, even amongst like, you'll have like these big gaijin parties or whatever we call them, you know, and in that group too many times like I've just been in a room with like all white foreigners, and when they find out that I'm like a foreign person who has like Japanese blood, I've just been in situations where it's like, so does that mean you can't do this, or like, so you were born here and this, and you know, sometimes I wonder if some folks are just naturally curious and they just want to know more about, because they don't know, and that's fine. Like they haven't met another Japanese American person, but this is really exhausting.
Do you want to summarize your experience in Japan?
I mean, again, I got nothing against Japan. I got nothing against Japanese people or people of the foreign community or anything. I know I'm here by choice, you know. And I know there's good people out there in each respective area, like, but I'm just saying as a generalization, these are just kind of the things that...
Your personal experience.
Personal experiences, yeah. I'm not going to speak on behalf of all the Japanese Americans either. I'm sure there's other Japanese American folks who are experiencing a whole different thing out here. And that's totally cool. This is just my account. Alright, if you enjoyed listening to my rant, and this is the kind of content that's up your alley, give us a like, hit us with a subscribe, there's something you didn't understand or needed some clarification, drop a comment. If you're someone who wants to be my friend, hit me up.
This is his personal email.
I need friends.